The air in the back room of the Caspian Star was thick with the scent of old leather, cigar smoke, and borscht. It was Viktor Volkov's air. He breathed it in like it was the last vestige of the old country, a place that now existed only in his memory and in rooms like this one. Viktor sat at his usual table, a heavy oak monolith scarred with the history of deals made and deals broken. His hands, large and covered in a fine web of pale scars, rested on the table. One hand cradled a glass of tea, the other was a fist. It was always a fist. Across from him sat two men in suits that were too new, their faces too eager. They were talking about shipping routes, about percentages, about the new opportunities that arose when a competitor's warehouse mysteriously burned to the ground. Viktor listened. He listened the way a wolf listens to the rustling in the undergrowth. Not with his ears, but with his whole body. He felt the vibrations of their greed, their ambition, their fear. Dmitri, his lieutenant, stood by the door. Still as a statue. Dmitri had been with him for 30 years. He was a man carved from the same harsh Siberian rock as Viktor, and he understood the silence between words better than any man alive. The two young men finished their pitch, their voices hanging in the smoky air, thin and hopeful. Viktor took a slow sip of his tea. He set the glass down with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the tense quiet. "You think loyalty is a percentage?" Viktor said, his voice a low rumble, gravel over stones. It was not a question. The men shifted in their chairs. "No, Mr. Volkov, of course not," one of them stammered. "We just mean." Viktor raised a single finger. Silence fell again. "Loyalty is a foundation," he said. "You build a house on it. You do not sell pieces of it when the rent is due. I have no need for men who see the world as a marketplace for their honor. Your business is with someone else." He nodded once toward the door. Dmitri moved, his shadow detaching from the wall. He opened the door, and the message was clear. The two men, faces pale, scrambled to their feet and left without another word. The quiet returned, comfortable and familiar. Viktor stared at the empty chairs, his mind already moving on. That was his world. A world of foundations and fractures, of loyalty that was absolute and betrayal that was final. Then, the door opened again. Dmitri did not open it. He turned, his hand instinctively going to the inside of his jacket, his body tensing. Viktor looked up, his expression unchanged. It was a child. A little girl, no older than 8, stood in the doorway. She was small for her age, with wide, frightened eyes the color of a stormy sea. Her coat was too thin for the autumn chill, its buttons mismatched. In her hands, she clutched a pink ceramic piggy bank, the kind you have to smash to get the money out. She took a hesitant step into the room, then another. The heavy door swung shut behind her, muffling the sounds of the restaurant and sealing her inside this dangerous sanctuary. Dmitri looked at Viktor, his eyebrows raised in a silent question. "What is this? How did she get back here?" Viktor gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Wait." The girl walked slowly toward the massive oak table. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes fixed on Viktor. She was not looking at him with the fear he usually saw in the eyes of adults. It was a different kind of fear. The fear of a mouse facing a lion, not because the lion is evil, but because it is big. "They say you're the king of this street," she said, her voice a tiny whisper that barely carried across the room. Viktor did not answer. He simply watched her, his gaze unwavering. "A king can do anything," she continued, gaining a sliver of courage. "He can make bad men go away." She took another step forward and placed the pink piggy bank on the edge of the great table. It looked absurdly small and fragile there. A piece of a child's dream in a room built for nightmares. "I want to hire you," she said, her voice trembling but determined. She pushed the piggy bank toward him. It made a soft scraping sound on the wood. "It's all I have. There are $43.16 inside." I counted. Dmitri took a step forward, his patience worn thin. This was a mockery. A violation of the sanctity of this room. "Enough," he growled. "Get her out of here." But Victor raised his hand. A simple gesture. "Palm out." "Stop." Dmitri froze, his surprise evident on his stoic face. The boss had never done that before. Never interfered when protocol was being followed. The back room was for business. Serious business. Children did not belong. Victor's eyes never left the girl. He saw the raw desperation in her gaze, the impossible hope that had led her to walk into the lion's den. He saw something else, too. A ghost. A memory of another little girl with eyes just as wide, clutching a stuffed bear instead of a piggy bank. He's Anya. "Why do you need to hire a king?" Victor asked, his voice softer than Dmitri had heard it in years. The girl swallowed hard. "There's a man," she said. "He comes to our apartment. He shouts at my mama. He says she owes him money." Her lower lip began to tremble. "Mama is sick. The medicine costs a lot. She can't work as much. The man says, he says if we don't pay, he's going to throw us out on the street. He said he'd take our things." She looked down at her worn shoes. "We don't have many things." Viktor Volkov was not a good man. He knew this. The city knew this. He was a predator in a city of predators, a man who had built an empire on fear and intimidation. His hands were stained with the sins of a long and brutal life. He had crushed rivals, broken men, and enforced a code that was as unforgiving as the Siberian winter of his youth. His world was governed by a simple, ruthless calculus of power. You were either strong, or you were prey. You either commanded respect, or you paid tribute. There was no room for sentiment. No place for weakness. He had learned that lesson early, on the frozen streets of a forgotten city where kindness was a liability and survival was a daily war. He had carried that lesson with him across the ocean, building his life around it, fortifying his heart with it. His reputation was a shield and a sword. Men whispered his name in alleys and boardrooms. They knew he was a man of his word, but they also knew his word could be a death sentence. He controlled the docks, the unions, the quiet flow of goods that the city both needed and denied. He was a necessary evil, a pillar of a shadow economy, a king in a kingdom of shadows. But he had rules. His own code, forged in the crucible of his past. You do not harm children. You do not trouble women who are not in the life. You do not prey on the sick or the helpless for scraps. There was no honor in it. It was the work of jackals, not wolves. And Viktor Volkov was a wolf. The top of the food chain. He culled the herd, yes, but he did not torment the lambs for sport. This man the girl spoke of, this lone shark who frightened a sick woman and her child, he was a jackal. He was breaking the rules. Victor's rules. The girl, whose name he learned was Lena, stood before him, a small, trembling beacon of innocence in his dark world. She had no idea who he really was. To her, he was just a story, a neighborhood legend. The old man in the restaurant who everyone respected. The king of the street. She didn't see the blood on his hands or the ghosts in his eyes. She saw a solution. An authority figure who could fix a problem that was too big for her. Her mother, Maria, had come to this country 5 years ago with a heart full of dreams and lungs that were already failing her. She worked cleaning offices at night, a phantom moving through the empty towers of the city, scrubbing floors and polishing desks for men who never saw her face. She was a good mother. A fierce mother. She protected Lena from the harsh realities of their life with every ounce of her strength, telling her stories of a sunny village by the sea where they came from, a place that grew more beautiful with every retelling. But then the sickness had worsened. The doctors used long, complicated words, but the meaning was simple. Time was running out. The treatments were expensive, a mountain of bills she could never hope to climb. So she had borrowed money. Just a little at first, from a man named Rico, whose smile was as slick as the grease in his hair. He had seemed so helpful, so understanding. But the interest grew. It multiplied, spiraling out of control until the debt was a monster that lived in their tiny apartment, devouring every dollar she earned. Rico's visits became more frequent, his voice louder, his threats more pointed. He was a bottom feeder, a man who worked for a rival of Victor's, a younger, more volatile player who had no respect for the old ways, for the code. Rico enjoyed the fear he inspired. He fed on the desperation of people like Maria. It made him feel powerful. Lena heard everything from her bedroom, huddled under her thin blanket. She heard her mother's pleading, her quiet sobs after he left. She saw the exhaustion etched on her mother's face, a map of their dwindling hope. And in the simple, beautiful logic of a child's heart, she had decided to act. She had heard the whispers on the street about the old man at the Caspian Star. The man everyone was afraid of. The man who fixed things. So she took her life savings, $43.16, and went to hire a king. Victor looked at the piggy bank. He looked at the child. And the wall he had spent a lifetime building around his heart began to crumble. He saw his own daughter, Anya. She had been 7 when she was taken from him. Not by sickness, but by fire and blood. A car bomb intended for him. A message from an enemy who had no code, no honor. An enemy who believed that to kill a wolf, you first kill his cub. The memory was a wound that had never healed. It was a cold, empty room in the center of his soul, a room he never entered. But this girl, this Lena, had just walked right in and turned on the light. He remembered Anya's laugh. He remembered the weight of her in his arms. He remembered her absolute, unquestioning faith that he, her papa, could fix anything. He could slay any dragon, mend any broken toy, chase away any monster under the bed. But he hadn't been able to save her. The most powerful man in the city's underworld had been helpless to protect his own child. The irony was a bitter poison he had swallowed every day for 20 years. His power, his empire, it was all built on her grave. A monument of rage and grief. He looked at Lena, at her fierce, desperate hope. And he saw a chance. A small, impossible chance. Not to go back. Never to go back. But to change the ending of the story. Just this once. He could not save his own daughter. But he could save this one. The internal war was brief but violent. The cold, pragmatic part of him, the part that had kept him alive for 65 years, screamed that this was a mistake. This was sentiment. Weakness. Getting involved in a street-level dispute over a few $1,000s was beneath him. It was messy. It would draw attention. It would signal to his enemies that the old wolf was losing his edge, getting soft. But the other part of him, the ghost of a father, was louder. It pointed at the girl. It pointed at the piggy bank. It whispered that some foundations were more important than business. Some rules were meant to be broken, and some were meant to be enforced with extreme prejudice. The rule about children was absolute. He made his choice. It wasn't even a choice. It was an inevitability, set in motion the moment she walked through that door. Victor slid the pink piggy bank closer to him. He looked at Lena, his dark eyes holding hers. "I accept your payment," he said, his voice a solemn vow. "The king is hired." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees washed over Lena. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had to be brave. "What is the name of this man who troubles your mother?" Victor asked. "Rico," she whispered. "His name is Rico." Victor nodded slowly. He knew the name. A vulture who worked for Marco, a young upstart who thought brutality was a substitute for strength. This was not just about a sick woman and her child anymore. It was about order. It was about reminding the jackals who the wolf was. He turned his gaze to Dmitri, who was watching this entire exchange with a look of stunned disbelief. "Dmitri," Victor said, his voice now cold and sharp, the warmth gone. "Get the car. And get me everything we have on a man named Rico. I want to know where he eats, where he sleeps, where he breathes. I want to know the name of his mother. Dmitri nodded, the confusion on his face replaced by the familiar mask of professional efficiency. An order was an order. The boss's reasons were his own. And Dmitri, Victor added, as his lieutenant reached the door. Bring me a hammer. Dmitri paused, then nodded again without question. Victor turned back to the girl. You will wait here, he said. Dmitri will bring you some food from the kitchen. Some blini. Do you like blini? Lena, overwhelmed, could only nod. Good, Victor said. When I return, this problem will be solved. You have my word. The word of Viktor Volkov. It was the most valuable and most dangerous currency in his world. And he had just given it to a little girl with $43.16. Dmitri returned a few minutes later with a small, heavy hammer and a plate of warm blini with sour cream and jam. He placed the food in front of the girl and the hammer on the table beside the piggy bank. Victor picked up the hammer. He looked at Lena. This is the part one never liked, he said, a sad, distant look in his eyes. He remembered Anya crying once when her own piggy bank had to be broken. It felt like a betrayal of a friend. With one swift, precise tap, he shattered the ceramic pig. Coins and a few crumpled dollar bills spilled out across the dark wood of the table. He painstakingly counted it out. The crumpled bills, the quarters, the dimes, the pennies. $43.16. Exactly as she had said. He carefully gathered the money and put it in the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket. A king always collects his fee. Eat, he said to Lena, gesturing to the plate. Your job is done. Now it is my turn. He stood up, the full weight of his presence filling the room. He was not a tall man, but he had a density to him, a gravity that bent the world around him. He walked out of the room, leaving Lena with a plate of pancakes and the quiet promise of a monster who was now on her side. The plan was simple. Simplicity was efficient, and Victor was a man who valued efficiency above all else. There would be no elaborate schemes, no intricate traps. This was not a chess match. It was pest control. In the back of his black sedan, gliding silently through the city streets, Victor reviewed the file Dmitri had compiled. It was thin. Rico was a nobody. A small-time enforcer with a big mouth and a cruel streak. He had a small crew, other nobodies like himself. They operated out of a derelict warehouse by the river, a territory belonging to Marco. A territory Marco was about to lose. He is there now, Dmitri said from the passenger seat, looking at his phone. Him and 3 of his men. Playing cards. Just the 4 of them. Victor asked. Yes. Good, Victor said. Pull over here. The car stopped in a dark alley a block away from the warehouse. 2 other cars, identical black sedans, pulled in behind them. 6 men got out, including Dmitri. They were silent, professional. They wore dark suits and grim expressions. They were Victor's fist. Victor got out of the car. He did not need to give a speech. He did not need to rally his troops. He just looked at them, and they understood. No noise, Victor said. No mess. Bring Rico to me. Alive. The others, they are a clerical error. Correct it. The men nodded and melted into the shadows. Victor remained by the car, listening to the sounds of the city. The distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a subway train beneath his feet. He was a part of this city's heartbeat, its dark, thrumming pulse. He did not have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes. There were no sounds of a struggle. No shouts. No gunshots. Just the quiet, brutal efficiency of his men. They returned from the darkness. 2 of them were holding Rico between them, his arms pinned behind his back. His face was bruised, and a trickle of blood ran from his lip. His cheap, flashy suit was torn. His eyes were wide with terror. He saw Victor standing by the car and seemed to shrink, his tough guy facade dissolving into pure animal fear. Mr. Volkov, he stammered. I don't understand. I work for Marco. We have an agreement. You stay on your side of the river? Victor walked slowly toward him until they were inches apart. Rico smelled of cheap cologne and fear sweat. There are no sides of the river tonight, Rico, Victor said, his voice dangerously calm. Tonight, there is only my side. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, crumpled dollar bill. He held it up in front of Rico's face. Do you know what this is? Victor asked. Rico stared at it, confused. It's $1. This is part of a payment, Victor said. A payment for a service. I was hired to solve a problem. And you, Rico, are the problem. He paused, letting the words sink in. I was hired by a little girl. Her name is Lena. She lives on the 3rd floor of the building on Elm Street. The one with the broken front door. Does that address sound familiar to you? Understanding, and a new, deeper level of terror, dawned on Rico's face. The woman. Maria, he whispered. It was just business. She owed money. Victor's eyes turned to chips of ice. You call frightening a sick woman business. You call threatening to throw a child onto the street business. This is not business. This is filth. In my world, we take out the trash. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Her mother works all night cleaning the floors that men like you walk on, just so her daughter can have a roof over her head. Her mother is dying, and instead of showing a shred of human decency, you saw an opportunity. You are a jackal, Rico. A scavenger who feeds on the weak. And my kingdom has no room for jackals. Victor stepped back. He looked at Dmitri. The debt owed by Maria is paid, Victor said. All of it. Is that understood? He was speaking to Rico, but his eyes were on his men. This was a lesson for everyone. Rico nodded frantically. Yes, yes, of course. Paid in full. I'll never go near them again. I swear. I know you won't, Victor said softly. He turned and walked back to his car. He did not need to give the final order. It was understood. The problem of Rico, and the clerical error of his associates, was permanently resolved. The file was closed. As the sedan pulled away from the curb, Dmitri turned to him. And Marco, he asked. He will not be happy that we crossed the river. That we took one of his men. Victor stared out the window at the blurred city lights. Marco is a child playing with his father's guns, he said. He has forgotten the rules. Send him a message. Tell him his man was operating without a license. Tell him I have revoked it. And tell him if he has a problem with that, he knows where to find me. He reached into his pocket and felt the crumpled bills and the cold, heavy coins. $43.16. It was the best money he had ever earned. When Victor returned to the restaurant, it was nearly midnight. The main dining room was empty, the chairs stacked on the tables. The only light came from the back room. He walked in. Lena was asleep, curled up on one of the plush leather chairs. One of the busboys had given her his own coat as a blanket. The empty plate of blini was on the table beside her. Victor stood there for a long moment, just watching her. The rise and fall of her small chest. The peaceful, untroubled expression on her face. This was what he had bought with his violence. This small moment of peace. He gently shook her shoulder. Lena. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked up at him, her gaze sleepy and confused for a second, then filled with remembrance. Is it done? She asked, her voice thick with sleep. Is the bad man gone? He is gone, Victor confirmed. He will not be bothering you or your mother ever again. This, I promise. He had a brief thought of Rico, of the finality of his solution, and felt not a shred of remorse. It was simply a thing that had to be done. A ledger that had to be balanced. Your mother will be worried, Victor said. Dmitri will take you home. He helped her down from the chair. She stood before him, looking up at his stern, weathered face. I don't know how to thank you, she said. Victor reached into his pocket, but instead of pulling out the money, he pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from the hospital's billing department. It was marked a paid in full. He had made another stop before returning. He also pulled out a thick envelope. This is for your mother, he said, pressing the envelope and the receipt into her hands. It will help with the medicine. And with the rent. So she does not have to worry anymore. So she can rest. Lena looked at the envelope, then back at him. Her eyes were shining with tears. But I already paid you, she said, her voice a small, confused whisper. My piggy bank. Victor knelt down, a gesture so foreign to him that his knees protested. He was now at her eye level. He saw the reflection of the dim light in her wide, innocent eyes. Yes, you did, he said, his voice gentle. And what you gave me was worth more than all the money in this city. You reminded an old man of something he had forgotten. He paused, searching for the right words. You reminded me what it feels like to be a king who can actually protect someone. Lena looked at him, her head tilted. She was trying to understand the deep well of sadness she saw in this powerful man's eyes. She reached out a small hand and placed it on his rough, scarred one. Mr. Volkov, she asked, with the profound, simple curiosity of a child. Are you a good guy or a bad guy? The question hit him harder than any bullet ever had. It was the question he had asked himself in the dark of night for 20 years. It was the question his own daughter might have asked him one day, had she lived. He looked at her small hand on his. He thought of the men his fist had crushed. He thought of the fear his name inspired. He thought of the dark empire he commanded. Then he looked at her face, now safe and hopeful. He thought of her mother, who would sleep without fear tonight for the first time in months. I am what I need to be, he answered, his voice thick with a lifetime of regret and resolve. But tonight you made me the good guy. He stood up slowly. He took a business card from his wallet. It was blank except for a single phone number. Give this to your mother, he said. Tell her if anyone, and I mean anyone, ever troubles her again, she is to call this number. Day or night. Your family is under my protection now. Completely. No one will harm you. It was a promise backed by an army. A guarantee of safety in a city that offered none. Dmitri led the sleepy girl out to the car. Victor stood in the doorway of the back room, watching them go. He went back to his table and sat down. The broken pieces of the pink piggy bank were still there. He picked one up, a small shard with a painted blue flower on it. He closed his fist around it, the sharp edges digging into his palm. He did not feel the pain. He felt something else. A flicker of warmth in the cold, empty room of his soul. A light had been turned on. Years passed. The city changed. Skyscrapers rose and fell. Empires of concrete and crime crumbled, replaced by new ones. But Viktor Volkov endured. He grew older, slower. His hair turned from iron gray to snow white. But his eyes remained the same, missing nothing. His grip on his kingdom never faltered. He never saw Lena again. But he knew about her. He received reports. Quiet updates from the shadows, delivered by Dmitri. He knew her mother, Maria, had lived another 3 years, years of peace and comfort, free from fear and debt. She had passed away in her sleep, holding her daughter's hand. He knew that the money in the envelope had been put into a trust. It paid for Lena's education. First a good school, then a better one. Then university. He read the reports with a quiet, detached satisfaction. Lena had excelled. She was smart, hardworking. She became a doctor. A pediatrician who worked at a clinic in a poor neighborhood, not far from the same streets where she had grown up. She dedicated her life to healing children. To fixing things. Viktor Volkov, the old wolf, sat in the back room of the Caspian Star, which had changed as little as he had. He was looking at the wall above his table. Among the framed photos of old country landscapes and stern-faced ancestors, there was a small, simple drawing. It was a child's drawing, done in crayon. It depicted a big, grumpy-looking bear in a suit, standing protectively in front of a small girl. Above them, the sun was shining. The drawing had arrived by mail a week after that fateful night, addressed only to the King of Caspian Star. There was no note. None was needed. Dmitri entered the room, now a man whose face was as lined and weathered as his boss's. He placed a glass of tea on the table. "She is getting married next month," Dmitri said quietly. He didn't have to say who. Viktor nodded, his eyes still on the drawing. "He is a good man?" Viktor asked. "A teacher," Dmitri replied. "A very good man." "Good," Viktor said. He reached into the top drawer of his desk. It was the only thing in the drawer. A small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a collection of crumpled dollar bills and a handful of coins. $43.16. His most valuable possession. He had never spent it. It was a reminder. A touchstone. Proof that even in the darkest of worlds, a single, small act of courage could change everything. It proved that a man is not defined solely by the bad he has done, but also by the good he chose to do when no one was watching. True strength, he had learned that night, was not about how much fear you could inspire. It was about how much you were willing to protect. It was about understanding that the most profound power lies not in being a king who rules, but in being a shield for the vulnerable, a quiet guardian for the innocent. And sometimes, the greatest treasures are not kept in vaults, but in the memory of a promise kept to a child.